how do we work together? How do we really leverage the incredible expertise that we have in this building to be able to support as many kids as possible, and moved away from these isolated islands of excellence, great teachers doing great things in their classrooms, to how could we create this really robust collaborative community to meet the needs of so many more kids together. And I think that's really been the driving mantra to the work I do now around a framework we refer to as collaborative response, which is really about leveraging the most important critical resource that I think we have in education, and that is the adults that we have in the building, the teachers, the support staff, all of those that are there to, with a driving passion to make a difference for kids. In our school, we had centuries of teaching experience. If you added up
Yep.
everybody's years of
Yeah.
experience, it was massive. And how could we leverage that? Because what I'm struggling with in this classroom, there might be a solution 2 doors down that I'm not even aware of. Even
Yep.
though in the school we're getting along, we're talking to one another, but how could we harness that and really, really make it purposeful? So I think in response to your question, I think every teacher struggles. This is just a fact of life. And I think we have to first acknowledge that none of us have this completely figured out, and that's okay. It took me a number of years before you could admit that I don't know everything that I don't know
Well,
exactly
it's
what
a
I'm
human
doing, right?
endeavor with human beings,
Yeah,
so
it
it's
is.
never going to be fully. It's not a science necessarily.
Absolutely.
Mr. Clark After Dark is brought to you by Luxy. That's Luxy. Luxy is the standard for modern dating, as it gives you a greater understanding of a potential match's intentions and background before you make your move. Swiping endlessly on other dating apps can be exhausting and often leaves you with only the leftovers in your dating pool. Luxy is an exclusive platform with just a 10 to 15% acceptance rate, as well as a profile and income verification feature, so you can be confident you're only connecting with those who meet your high standards. Their community guidelines emphasize safety, trust, and quality by strictly prohibiting scams, explicit content, and harassment. 2025 is your year to stop settling. With Luxy, there is no luck involved, just real connections with people who truly match what it is you are looking for. Download the Luxy app today to see if you qualify for a better chance of finding the right person for you. And now, back to the show.
So, going back to your point about just those 6 people in the room and the wealth of knowledge, how could we create formalized structures that not only allowed us to be able to say and acknowledge that I don't know what to do, can someone help me? That's not only okay, it's expected. It's what we should be doing. And how could we create formalized structures where we're coming together to be able to admit that I have this student and here's a struggle that I'm having, and I'm not looking to pass it off. I own it. How can my colleagues help to support me? And when we can create really formalized structures that allow us to engage in productive, meaningful conversation, what I find is we formalize those structures, but then the informal conversation that happens in the hallways, in the staff room after school, go to a different level. They reach a place of, I come into a room and I want to talk about my practice, my what I've tried in the classroom, what's worked, what hasn't. And I always shudder a little bit when I hear a school say, well, we don't talk shop in the staff room. Well, why? This is so critically important what we're doing with children. Why wouldn't we want to talk about what we're trying, what we're doing, what we're seeing success, where we're struggling, and just making that a part of our everyday existence in a school?
Well, and that's another, again, like when I was thinking about, because people have asked me like, well, why start a podcast?
Yeah.
And I would say one of those things was in the staff room. It's really weird to just be like, like I'm eating my pretzels and telling them I'm living my life, and I ask you, Kurt, I'm like, hey, like, how has your teaching changed over the years? Like it can come across as very like no one wants to answer that question at 12:10
No one,
p.m. on like a crazy Tuesday. You're
yeah,
like, what? Like, Lucas, shut up. I'm trying to
no
eat
one
here.
sits next
I'm
to Lucas
dissociating.
anymore in that situation, right?
Yeah, and like and honestly, as I've like even just a few just down the hall, like people would just tell me crazy stories about like teaching in Kenya and teaching in London and teaching in all these like crazy places that wouldn't necessarily come up if you didn't ask those like weird questions, if that makes sense, like
Yeah.
on a podcast format, which is definitely fun. But then you get the what I think for me, the podcast has helped me take the pressure off myself.
Hmm.
And I think that really comes into the sense of when you, because I guess one of the purposes of needing a collaborative response model is that teachers are afraid to ask for help for whatever
Yep.
reason. And we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be really good at our craft, even if we're brand new. Like we have this kind of like, so is that one of the reasons for making this like a purposeful structure
Yeah.
rather than like an informal option on a PLF, if that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And so picture this, Lucas. We
Mm-hmm.
come into a meeting that's been structured in our school. It's happening every 3 to 5 weeks. And I can go into further detail if you like around layers of collaboration, because I believe
Mm-hmm.
every school needs 4 layers of collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
But one of those layers, imagine that you're asked to come into a conversation that's going to be facilitated, and you're required to not only bring up what's a celebration that you've seen in the last few weeks, and someone's going to ask you why. Why did that happen? And when you say, I have a student and here's the success I've seen, and somebody then says, what do you think you did that led to that success? It activates a layer of reflection, of sharing, and other people in the room hear, well, I tried this strategy and it really had an impact. And now people are learning from one another. And then the second question we're going to ask you is, what is a student that you're concerned with right now? And what's one key issue that you're experiencing right now? And we set up that in time, before you come to this meeting, you're taking a look at your data that you have, whatever that looks like. And we're asking you not to bring your most complex student to the forefront, but a student that our data says is close. In high school, I often say it's your bubble kid. Who's the kid that's sitting between 45 to 55% in your class right now, just on the cusp? And what's one key issue? And then what's going to happen is other teachers in the room we're going to deliberately ask, once we've clarified that key issue, we're going to ask who else has a student with a similar key issue. Just a name, no story, just the name, because we're trying to reinforce that it's not just you. There's others that are experiencing this. And then we turn the attention to what could we do to address that key issue. Not the student. In fact, at this point, I don't really care about the name
That's
of
good.
the
Like you're
student.
separating the name from the issue.
And we want to get that key issue really solidified. That, okay, so what I'm hearing from you, Lucas, is your key issue is staying focused on a task when working independently. And then we're going to
Mm-hmm.
say, okay, who else has a student? Just a name, no story, just a name, because we want to make sure this isn't a conversation about just Micah or about just Lucas, the teacher. And then we say, what could we do? And I often say this is that beautiful brainstorm where we leverage everybody's expertise in the room. And I come up that, one of the things that I do is this in the classroom, and you hear that and go, that's interesting. One of the things I do is this, but what if we were to do this? And during this part of the conversation, it's heavily facilitated so that we're not judging the ideas, that nowhere is anyone allowed to say, oh yeah, I've tried that doesn't work, or
Yeah.
no, trust me, you don't know Micah like I know Micah, this wouldn't work. We just open up the possibilities, and then we come back to say, all right, Kurtis, from this conversation, what's one thing that you commit to go back and try with Micah to see if it makes a difference? And I assign it as an action. So we say that through this process, it's highly solutions oriented and action focused. That we're not walking away and, the bell goes off and we're ready to go back to the class. And yeah, that was a nice conversation. No, I leave with, here's a commitment that I'm willing to try. And it's through
Mhm.
this formalized collaboration that, man, it just radically changed the way that we talk about how we're working in our school. We talk about 4 layers of team in our school, and
Yeah.
I'm going to give you just kind of a quick
Yeah,
layout.
let's go through this. So
Yeah,
4 levels of collaboration you were saying, right?
you bet. And I don't care
Mhm.
if your school has 90 teaching staff or 3. We need these 4 layers within the school. And the great news is when I talk about these, you're going to be able to say, "Oh yeah, I recognize that. Yeah, we do that." The first layer, we call it collaborative planning. And essentially it's, do we have opportunities for teachers to come together and just look at their data and talk about their practice, not focused on any individual student. Any school that's engaged in professional learning communities or Breakspear sprint model, examining
The
student
what?
work. Pardon?
Break what sprint? Break what sprint? I never
Sorry,
heard what you said.
Simon Breakspear, the author, he talks about learning sprints, where we set
Okay.
up a 3-week sprint in our classroom where we identify, here's one thing we're going to try. We're going to do it for 3 weeks, and then we're going to come back and talk about how it went. Um,
Interesting.
so whatever framework you're using in your school, so you talked about department meetings as a department head. That would be something I would consider would fall into collaborative planning. We're coming together, we're meeting, we're discussing what are we doing that we think are going to impact all students. Okay, that's that first layer. The second layer is this collaborative team meeting that I've discussed, and I'm going to come back to your question here in a second.
That's
Um,
all good. Yeah.
yeah, this collaborative team meeting is where I have asked student, here's my key issue, and then we talk about what could we do. Then the third layer is we refer to it as the school support team, and it's intended to be the key personnel in our building that are meeting on a regular basis to talk about students who need support beyond the classroom. So within my school, this was myself as principal, the assistant principal, our learning support teacher, and we had a family school liaison that worked with us in the high school, more around family supports and social dynamics. Anyway, the 4 of us every Thursday morning would meet and say, who are the kids that we need to be paying attention to? Oftentimes it was teachers coming and saying, hey, I've got this going on and we need to talk about it. So I've worked with a larger high school where they didn't have one school support team. They had many. Uh, Sorry, I shouldn't say, I'll qualify that. They had 4 within the school. There was a grade 10 team, a grade 11 team, a grade 12 team. Each team had one of their assistant principals, one of their school counselors, and then a learning services member that were on. And people knew that if I'm struggling with this kid in grade 11, this is the team I go and um,
Like it's
refer.
not a subject question; it's a grade level student question.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, and it's
Yeah.
more of a, man, I've got a kid that I suspect that they're cutting.
Yeah.
I need to bring this up to somebody. And so we have a
Mhm.
team that is really focused in on what are we doing to support the kids beyond the classroom?
Mhm.
How do we coordinate that? And then our fourth layer, we refer to it as case consult. But again, think of these as layers, not actual specific meetings. The case
Yeah.
consult is intended to be the layer where we are going to meet about one kid. So we've said in our school, Micah we're really worried about what's going on. And so we're going to have a meeting about just Micah, and we're going to invite the people teaching Micah. We're going to bring his parents in, and we might bring in an external partner as part of the conversation. And what we find is if schools haven't thought about the layering, oftentimes every school does the one kid meeting.
Yeah.
Every school. Um, we find if people haven't thought about the layering, we get caught in lots of one kid at a time conversations, which is really unsustainable. It's overwhelming.
Yeah.
If I'm an administrator in a school of 1,200 kids, if I'm doing one kid at a time
And
conversation
often that kid will likely repeat
over
in
and over,
conversation and more. So you're looking at hours of meetings for,
uh-huh.
again, they might need it, but like you can put other systems in place to like get the same level of even higher levels of help and assistance without
Man,
getting
you
there.
you
Yeah.
nailed it, Lucas, with the mention of systems. What we do is we're creating systems so that we have less kids that get to the one kid at a time conversation, but the ones that do are the ones that absolutely need to. So, scaling this back, then, we've got those 4 layers. That second layer is this collaborative team meeting. And what I find as far as barriers for teachers, and I think this is just barriers for human beings, is first off getting comfortable to be able to come into a space and say, I'm struggling. This is a really hard thing for us to do. And think about, go back to your second year self. And it's interesting when you're talking about, oh my goodness, they threw me into a department head in my second year. What were they thinking? I went into an assistant principal role in my second year. It was a fascinating, yeah, smaller
That was
northern
insane.
school. Yeah, they were trying to create a aspiring
Like,
leader
Kurt, you
type
got this,
program.
right? I guess so.
Yeah, and so I got tapped in my second year to move into this role, and
That is
it,
overwhelming.
yeah, it was. And again, you want to talk imposter syndrome of I'm faking this thing, man. Like I'm,
Like, I was in university a year ago.
yeah, exactly. Uh, but actually, I think it was one of the best learning experiences I had. I was in that role in that school for, I think it was probably 5 years, but it was what really solidified for me the idea that you can't expect the position to hold the knowledge and authority. You have to understand that other people around you know more.
Yeah.
That the room is always smarter than any one person. So, how do we leverage the room? And that became really apparent when people would come to me. It was fascinating that it was probably within the first week that I even got assigned the role or announced that I was going to be the assistant principal. And a colleague came to me with a question that they had where I went, man, a week ago you wouldn't have asked me this. Like it's because I've got this title next to my
Yep.
name, and let's be honest, it was a point 0.1 AP. Like I was, they were just trying to create a situation where a person
Yeah.
could learn how to become a leader through this. But man, my just because
Interesting
I
though.
have that AP, that assistant principal title, I don't know more than I did a week ago. I don't know how to
Yeah.
answer this question. So how do we leverage the room? So coming back, the the creating the space where it's not only acceptable to say I don't know, but actually expected. I think that's one of our hardest challenges. And it's through doing these meetings over and over and over again that we allow people to be vulnerable, to be able to say, I have this student and I'm struggling, and I'm not trying to pass it off. I'm not saying I've done everything. I'm done. I'm out. I'm
Mhm.
checked out. Somebody else has to take this kid, or I'm not getting into a space of, well, there's nothing I can do until I get more time, until this kid gets better parents, until we get more funding for resources. We create a space of, it's not only okay to say I'm not sure what to do, but it's expected. And I
Mhm.
often say that we should be creating spaces and cultures of collaboration where it's a badge of honor to be able to say, I'm struggling right now, I need help. And
Mhm.
it's not out of shame or lack of expertise or lack of professional knowledge. It's
Mhm.
a reality. Like we
Yeah.
need spaces where we can say, I don't know. And I think that's one of our biggest barriers, which is why I'm so passionate about creating these collaborative structures that we can operate in, because we need to allow people to say, to be vulnerable and open up and be able to say, I don't know what to do. But then the next conversation is, okay, what could we do?
Yeah.
What are possibilities? What are ideas that we could share?
I do think that if done well, the collaborative response model like allows you to kind of air the dirty laundry without like making them smell it too.
Yeah,
That makes sense. It's like,
that's a great way to
you
say
can
it.
kind of like, it's like, okay, I don't want to like go through 30 minutes of the kind of like the dumping of all of this, but you get to the root of it without that, which I think
So,
is, yeah.
yeah, Lucas, the fascinating thing about this, we stay within the structure. And when first introduced into a school, it's foreign, it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
because if you've asked me to come to a meeting and share a student and a struggle that I'm having, I'm naturally inclined to want to tell you the story. I want to tell you
Yeah.
everything that I've tried, everything I've known about this kiddo. And through the structure, we often say the collaborative team meeting is no storytelling. If
Mhm.
if you say, man, you need to understand Micah of what's going on, then we say, okay, that conversation exists in one of our other layers. Should we have a conversation
Yeah.
about just Micah? If so, that's a case consult, and let's get the right people around the table. Because in the collaborative team meeting, it's highly possible that we have 3 people around the table that don't interact with that kid daily. We want to try
Yeah,
and
but they can think about an idea, not a
you
student.
bet. When I can come and I've prepared ahead of time as a teacher, and again, this is where we talk about the data and evidence becomes really important in this process. That when I scan my data, whatever that is, let's say I'm looking through, and we've said that this week we are coming together in a collaborative team meeting, and the focus is um, academic achievement. That's the overarching focus. So I know this is not a space to bring up a kid that is getting into all sorts of um, peer altercations or regulation problems or anything. I'm going to come
Mhm.
ready with ask student, and my key issue is let's go with a simple idea of kids not checking assignment criteria before handing in assignments. Um, and again, that might seem like I've had teachers say, well, that's great if that's your key issue. In my school, my key issue is I've got gang violence going on, I've got homelessness issues, I've got
Yeah.
drug addiction thing. And we say those are real problems. They exist in one of our other layers. In the collaborative team
Yeah.
meeting, let's talk about what's in our locus of control. So, checking assignment criteria. And in the meeting, we purposefully facilitate that that you bring up that I have Micah, and nowhere in the process can I talk about all the things I've done, I've tried, or let me tell you a little story about Micah. It's
Mhm.
I have this kid, and here's my key issue. And then we might ask a couple questions to clarify the key issue, just to make sure we
Yeah.
around the table understand it. But then we're going to turn quickly into name other kids where we're seeing this, so that it's not a conversation about, like I said before, about Micah or about Lucas the teacher. And then what could we do? That
Mhm.
that opens up a door for innovative thinking, for solutions focused thinking. Um, Venting doesn't happen in that conversation.
Yeah. And 'cause I guess that opposite question would be like, how, like, I guess, have you ever gone into a school, organized maybe like a facilitation of these meetings, and then kind of revisited that school 6 months later or something, and been like, something is, it's not working out, but it's because of X, Y, and Z? Like,
Yeah,
what kind of mistakes do schools make, like, in trying to implement this?
yeah, 100%. And that's a great question. I've dealt with that twice in this past week, Lucas. It almost always
Okay.
it almost always comes down to structure. Um,
Okay.
and what I mean by structure is if um, if we picture 6 people sitting around a table, and when we introduce structure, it can feel uncomfortable to start.
Mhm.
And I often say a collaborative team meeting, if it's working well, should have a small level of discomfort naturally, because people are
Mhm.
going to ask each other difficult questions, and it's not to try and expose each other for the frauds that we are. It's to dig into what is it that we know and what is it that we do. um, and so there's always that little level of discomfort. But when I come back to lacking structure, a school that says, well, we get along really great in this school, we don't need norms established. No, every school needs, when you come into these meetings, norms established. And I have yet to see a school where they weren't collaborating great initially and it went to the next level once they introduced norms. Like, it doesn't hinder collaboration, it enhances it. So being able to
Mhm.
explicitly say, we agree, we will arrive on time and prepared, and making that an explicit expectation. And then the schools that do really well around this also have the conversation, what do we agree to do when someone breaks that norm? What do we and
Where I
and
was going.
yeah, I don't mean that as punitive. I saw one school with
No.
that very norm of we agree we'll arrive on time, and if someone doesn't, it's their job to bring snacks next time. So, but just we understand that these norms are important. Another thing, a structure piece, and again, we've come to understand that these structures don't just work in collaborative team meetings. They work anytime you're meeting
Yeah.
as adults, and we've also seen now it's not just schools that need these
Mhm.
structures. I've had lots of friends in the business community that say, "Man, we introduce norms into our weekly sales meetings." And it's taken the conversation to the next level. The second thing is, do we have roles clearly assigned that
Yeah.
when I come into the meeting, we know explicitly who's taking notes, who's the timekeeper, because we want to cap this conversation at 10 minutes. We want to start with celebrations, and we're only going to take 8 minutes for that. And again, when you first introduce that, you go, man, this feels like a
Well, it's like
it feels
the
awkward.
unwritten teacher culture is like,
Yeah,
honestly, on the PD days, like we kind of just want to shoot the shit. Like we kind of
yeah,
just want to like it's a bit more chill. Students aren't in the building. Like we look at the facilitator, and I've been the facilitator in meetings, and I'm like trying to be serious, but I'm like laughing at the same time because it feels weird. Like it feels weird trying to almost be the classroom manager of your colleagues
yeah.
because you're
And
like, we're trying to actually get this going.
and
But
man, you've got it bang on. In a classroom, when we have clear routines,
yeah,
expectations, we know that amazing learning can happen when that's there. If it's not clearly laid out, sometimes the chaos can take over. And it's the same thing for adults. Um, if we can agree, and again, it feels uncomfortable with this, but if we can agree that in this meeting, this person's role is the facilitator, and here's what they're going to do when they facilitate. This person's a record keeper. We have some schools that say we've introduced the role of the interrupter. It's the interrupter's job to
yeah,
say,
yeah,
to interrupt somebody when they're on a tangent and say, whoa, what are we going to do about this? One of the worst mistakes I ever made as an administrator is we had one year where we had a larger contingent of grade 5 students, and we were struggling with, do we keep them in two classes that were large, or break it into
hmm
three? But we didn't have the resources to get that third
yeah,
teacher.
yeah.
So we said, what
hmm
if the assistant principal and myself will break the kids into three, and I'll teach LA, language arts, she'll teach math in the morning, and then we'll make them into two bigger classes in the afternoon. So I committed myself to teaching grade 5 language arts every morning, which in a normal circumstance wouldn't be that big a deal. But
Yeah,
as a full time
but you're
principal,
carrying a lot.
yeah, I didn't have time to prep and plan for that at all. There was many times where I'd look up and go, "Oh my goodness, I got to get to that class," um, and I've got nothing ready. It was
hmm
the worst teaching that I've ever done in my life. And it was absolutely the worst learning circumstance. Like those poor kids. Um, I won't speak for the assistant principal, but for the time I had for them for language arts, it it was dead time. And it's because I had no structure, I had no process, there was no plan for
yeah.
execution. And as a result, everything just fizzled. It was poor. And I'll equate this back to meetings. If we have a meeting that is well structured, has norms established, has a clear plan of action, man, 45 minutes flies by. Whenever I hear a school say, "Ugh, I wish we could get rid of meetings," I say, no, I don't think that's true. I think what you're saying is, I wish
Yeah.
we could get rid of poorly run or poorly planned meetings. Meetings that are well structured and set up are engaging.
Are kind of fun.
They are, and they
Yeah,
lift spirit. And we find that people in these collaborative team meetings don't say, "Man, I wish we didn't have them." They usually say, "Man, I wish we had more of these because
yeah.
I get so much out of this."
So the last quote is, education is what remains once one has forgotten everything they have learned in school. So, what is it that you want people to take away from their time with you that they won't necessarily get with anyone else?
Um, I think for me, the legacy, if you want to refer to it as that, is when I'm long gone as a voice for whatever minimal audience that is listening to that voice. Um, it would be that, remember, the room is always smarter than any one person in it. And that idea that together we are better, stronger, and smarter than any one of us on our own. And that doesn't mean that we need to um, just work in groups and everything is better, because I think both of us have had experiences where working in groups was actually painstaking, poke your eye out with a new needle kind of experience.
Noodle could also work.
Yeah, noodle, needle. um, but if you're in well-structured, truly collaborative situations, it energizes it. I've found over the last few years, especially when we've been talking so much about teacher wellness and burnout and that, there's less of that happens when we're engaged in truly collaborative cultures. When we are truly in places where you come in every day and are inspired and energized by the people around you, that's what makes this profession so rewarding and exciting, is when we can be growing, learning, and then helping others to engage in that process. Of course, our students are learners, but our colleagues as well. So I think what remains after we're out of school is, how do we create highly intentional and purposeful collaborative cultures, and recognizing that together we are better than any one of us. A great coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, Chuck Noll, who was there, I forget how many decades he was their head coach. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, they've only had like 3 or something
Yeah,
in like their
I
whole
think four.
franchise, something
I
like
heard that.
that. Yeah, oh
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yesterday, four head coaches in their entire history, and Chuck was there for a long time. He had this amazing quote, and I'm probably going to butcher it, so bear with me. That
So,
the the sum of the parts is never greater than the whole. It's how those parts work together. And what he was saying was, just saying that we're bringing this group together to work, it actually might not be beneficial. In fact, it might be a negative experience. It's how they work together. And I think that's one of the key things we need to do in education, is figure out, how do we create robust, highly intentional, collaborative cultures that eliminate feelings of isolation and individualism in our schools. Our profession has been one categorized by isolationism for far too long.
yeah,
We shouldn't
yeah.
have situations where people go into their classroom, close the door, and do their individual work. We need to create environments where every kid benefits because we're working as a team.
Beautiful. Because I even think like when you said parts and sum of parts, I'm thinking like if you take an engine apart and put all the parts into a bag, it's not going to run very well.
Yeah.
It depends how those parts kind of work together. But
Oh, that's beautiful.
beautiful.
I love that.
Thank you so much for coming on today, Kurt. I really appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to Maple Minds. I guess before we go, where can people find your work, and how can they follow up with you?